there's a little bit of your background and how you played college basketball, and then how you're also currently close to P3 in Santa Barbara, and you mentioned how you trained there for 3 years. And I think that me and Mike, and I'm sure a lot of people within our field have some intrigue into what P3 does. Um, so I think we'd be interested in hearing just kind of like your experience as an athlete training there and like what you thought, and now looking back as somebody within the field, do you realize now like wow, that was really high level stuff? Like what's your take on it now?
I think it, I mean, I was very fortunate. I went to Westmont College. Our AD had some type of, I think, ownership or like something to do with P3. So like all the Westmont athletes got to train there. It wasn't as I think high tech as you see how they work with their pros. It was kind of more like, hey, this is a hub that we could work out at. We got to work with their trainer, Sam Brown. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him. He's kind of behind the scenes. I don't think he has a big social media following. I don't even know if he has social media. But he was our trainer. And I mean, it was amazing. One, it was amazing for me personally because I was the weird fifth grader that knew exactly what I was going to do my whole life. My dad's a doc. I grew up training since a young age. Wanted to be a chiro, which is what my dad is. He convinced me not to do that. But then when I was in college, I had an ankle surgery, a foot surgery, and a hip surgery. So I was basically just hurt my entire college career and never really played that much. So I basically just lived at P3 and learned under Sam and like tried to pick, like what are they doing with the biomechanics? What are they doing with the testing? What are they doing with the training? I mean, it was an amazing experience. When I look at the actual training, I can still tell you the exact workout that we did. We basically just did a linear periodization all off season. It was, pretty basic, but when you're a college age kid or like a high schooler going to college, that's all you really need. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, but we just followed that program for, I want to say, 6 to 8 weeks, and we all jumped higher, ran faster, and moved better. So it's like, it wasn't like people always ask them, like, it was nothing crazy.
When I was working privately, one of the things that we used to do all the time was we talk about like for the best private brands, companies that obviously have success, but also have like a model that you can replicate, make your own, etc. And we talk about like P3, we talk about like APEC, we talk about these different like really nicer private kind of brands that have built something really impressive. When you were going into the space of like truly making your own thing, private performance wise, were there certain groups, companies, people that you're trying to model yourself after because of the success that you saw them having? Or was it kind of like, hey, we're just going to dive into this and learn and kind of build a plane as we're in the air here?
So I was at, so after P3, then I went home for 6 months, and then I went to Proactive Sports Performance, which is a big facility in Westlake. And I was their head of MBA for 2 years, worked with a lot of high level guys. Um, but on the private side, typically you kind of have to work for yourself at some point if you want to make money. I was getting married, having kids. Uh, so I don't know if I mirrored anybody. I was in P3, so I kind of saw how they operated. I was in Proactive. I kind of saw how they operated. And I kind of found things that I liked, things that I didn't like, and how I kind of want to operate in my facility. Um, and then I think things people don't really talk about on the private side is obviously where you put your facility, like economics, logistics, all those things come into play way more than training athletes. Um, and like people like Ben Bruno, I think has talked about it a lot. Like, him working in Beverly Hills versus him working in North Dakota is completely different. And that was the difference between like Westlake, California and Ventura, California. Um, and so for me, it was just simple. Like, I want to have a high performance training facility in Ventura, where I'm from. Nobody else was doing it. Everybody in Ventura either went to Santa Barbara or went to Westlake. And that was how it was my entire life. So my whole goal was to operate and bring that to Ventura. And that's what I've done for the last 6 years, 7 years.
To Mike's point of talking about some like high level private facilities, I mean, proactive you could definitely throw in there. And from a basketball lens, like I don't know if proactive P3 like top of my list, at least from what I know from like a private perspective. What would you say were like similarities between those two on the basketball side, and then what would you say would are like differences between those two facilities and how they and coaches and how they run things?
I think the business side was slightly different. I think P3 obviously goes heavy on the evaluation, the testing protocols that they do. I think that's what gets a lot of the guys in the door. Um, Whereas Proactive, the owner has a lot of great relationships with like agencies. I think their thing was CAA. So like we would do all their pre-draft, and then some of those guys would then come back in the summertime because everybody comes back to Westlake or LA area. So that was like one of the biggest differences, um, which then in return from like the business side is, and I don't know how P3 always operates, but like I think sometimes when you're just the testing home, I'm always curious like how many of those guys actually spend more than a week or two in house versus, hey, I'm going to go get my testing done here, kind of see what my program looks like, and then I'm going to go back to home or wherever wherever I am. Whereas at Proactive, it was more like, okay, we have a relationship with the agent sends the guy there. We usually get about 6 to 8 weeks with them. From a training perspective, I think it was, relatively similar. At the end of the day, we did testing at Proactive as well. So you kind of test, you analyze, you then program, and you kind of start that program and you retest. And the training wise is pretty similar.
Knowing that you yourself, and then P3 and Proactive are relatively close, me and Mike need to make a little move from San Diego up to LA and take a little road trip and just hit all those spots and see what you guys do in person. Because I mean, it's three like high level facilities all in the same neck of the woods, so it's pretty simple to hit all three of you guys in one trip.
There's a ton within 30 miles of me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mike, did you have a follow up to that?
Yeah, kind of. We're just skipping around here a little bit, Jared. So I apologize if you thought that we would
You're good, man.
abide by the questions that we sent you. Just not at all. In terms of evaluation, what I find interesting is like, again, when I was working at TC Boost in Chicago, like our first day, like if a client walked in the first day, like we had a set evaluation for that day, and then like training would become whatever it needed to become. But I always struggle with that because like oftentimes I would evaluate someone and then like you take that sheet of paper and like you would never look at it ever again. And like obviously in team sport, evaluation is like, okay, what can you do efficiently for a big group that you can test, and make sure the tests are consistent? Is it the most effective testing? Maybe not, just because you're testing, who knows, 15 guys, 25 guys, 100 guys, right? So from like your side of when you think about evaluation, what do you think about the creation of that process and like creating something that is actionable? Like how do you think about that process for an athlete that walks into you on day one?
Yeah, I think and again, that's one of the things that I've seen across the board is these testing evaluations. I think sometimes one way people do it is to kind of show proof. Like if you're doing like a strength test, like one thing we used to do at Proactive sometimes was like a single leg press with a eccentric count and then push away at a percentage of body weight. Right, left, look at that. 6 weeks later, retest it. You could, somewhat say, hey, you got stronger unilaterally. Now, and then P3 obviously has their wide variety of, everything, the whole spectrum. I don't really do any strength testing. I don't know if I don't want to say it's not important, but I think when I get an intake now, my facility is mostly youth, high school, college. And we are fortunate to have some pretty elite high school and college kids right now. It's more, and you guys just had him on. I just listened to it. Todd Wright. I spent 6 to 9 months with him, which was gold. It's more movement efficiency. How are you able to move in and out of positions? How does your foot function? How do your hips function? Like, can you globally move and then coordinate and create rhythm within different movement patterns? So basically, like I just sit back and I look and I ask myself, like, do you look relatively athletic? So we'll go through locomotion, we'll go through some skips, some jumps, and I'm just checking boxes there. We'll start with table work, and then from there, we'll basically just go right into the force plates. I obviously use Hawken, and we'll do our testing on the force plate. And then after that, I think a big majority of what I do is a sit-down conversation. I try to understand who the athlete actually is. I try to understand their schedule, and then I try to understand injury history. and then their goals. And I think that encompasses a much better evaluation process for where I'm at currently. Then, hey, you got a dumbbell bench percent body weight test, a leg press test, a this or that, because I know that once we get into the actual program, I already know I'm going to get you stronger, bigger, stronger, faster, what every kid says they want to do. And I'm not too worried about where you are at day one. Most people I get day one, they have no concept of anything about how their body moves. And that to me is much more important early on. The weight, the load, all that stuff's going to come with just very consistent over time approach.
So whenever you were talking about just watching them move, where do you go from like this person struggles to coordinate movement and it lacks rhythm and lacks fluidity or whatever to make you seem or to deem them as potentially not very athletic? Like, is there a simple path that you kind of take each person on to try to infuse some of those qualities? Or are there like, this person needs this person lacks this, and then that infuses within your program?
One, I think there's two things here. One, that thing that I've learned from the elites, from some of the pros I worked with and some of my elite college kids and high school kids I have now, and I'm sure you guys see this. If I tell you to do a low A skip or an A skip or a backwards A skip, and I watch you do it, you walk back, I say, hey, do it like this, and then you instantaneously do it like that, it literally gives me answer that, hey, you are pretty, like you have something that other kids don't have. And that's typically what I'll do. I'll say, hey, you got an A skip, 10, 15 yards, walk back from it. They'll go through it, they'll come back. I'll say, hey, do it like this. The kids that are, elite, again, will flip it. The kids that aren't, don't really know how to coordinate, create that rhythm, don't really understand what I'm saying, don't really understand what they're watching. And so, so then those kids, we have me and my head of performance, we have a 12-week developmental program that we've developed. And that's what it's all about is I think a lot of it is just starting to do those things. I think a lot of kids lack this concept of play and going through different movement patterns. They're very structured in their sport. Everybody talks about it now, early specialization, but just getting them to skip multi-directionally, going forward, going backwards, going lateral, going, the opposite lateral, doing some type of like rotational stuff and just getting them to move in variety of locomotion patterns, and then take that into some jumping stuff. And then you just see it over the 12 weeks that they just start to express much more, objectively athletic patterns. And then we use the plates through our entire process. And I think, I don't know if I actually posted it, but we just finished our kind of first round of this 12-week development, and we released it online. I did 5 kids from day one to the last day. And I think our average increase on our key metrics was like 48% increase on all metrics. And so and again, we're not doing anything special. It's just getting the kids to start to understand how to use their body and, work through these patterns. And that's all it is. And then the strength is just progressive overload, basic level strength. And they just don't have that.
So when you say like the 12-week program, whenever you deem that individual to not move with the fluidity and rhythm that you would expect, or be able to pick up on things as quickly as you'd expect, is that kind of like their pre-lift work where now we're just exposing them to like high variety, like high volume of different locomotion patterns to just like expose them to that specific type of movement?
Yeah. So like the 12 weeks. So basically after our evaluation, we then will categorize the kid, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. Each tier is 4 weeks. So if you're tier 1, then that's the whole 12 weeks. If you're, relatively there, you'll start tier 3. And yeah, so like, then it goes based on if they come 2 days a week, 3 days a week. If they're 3 days a week, the first day is going to be kind of based around acceleration, and second day is going to be more kind of change direction, multi-direction. And the third day will be, high velocity. So then we'll tier different locomotion patterns, different jumping patterns, deceleration stuff within that. And then that becomes, a decent part of our actual training day. And then, like I said, the strength is just really basic heavy tempos, learning how to move your body, learning how to do the main movement patterns. And by the end of the 12 weeks, then we basically give more of like a customized kind of program based on where you're at.
So whenever we do these and we do them, I don't know, 1 to 2 times a week, it's funny because like there seems to be like this common thread that kind of like ties episodes together as we go, and it's not always the same. It kind of changes. And the one that's tying together from the episode that you mentioned with Todd was the foot, and he's a, in my opinion, expert when it comes to that, and delivered like a masterclass. And I'm always curious across the board because you mentioned about like foot assessment. I'm always curious to see how individuals do that because I think that there are so many different ways people view the foot, and it's a very complex structure. There's not that many ways people view progressive overload. Like there is, but like
Not
it's
really.
as you've mentioned a couple, like it is what it is. It's not hard to make people strong. But like the foot's really interesting. What are the ways that you like view the foot from a assessment perspective to deem good, bad, anything in between? And then also like what are ways that you've infused like targeting the foot within your actual training program? And we can touch on low level, potentially like low level high school athletes, all the way to like when you're working with your pro athletes, like what do you, and it might be the same, like I'm not saying pro athletes all have the best foot function, but like how do you kind of look across the board and train within that spectrum?
Yeah, first off, I'm nowhere near Todd with this stuff. I
Yeah,
learned
not
an
many people are, but
enormous amount.
my head was spinning the whole time he was talking. That's why I actually posted a video today of him going through the whole thing that he was talking about because on our episode he had a foot model and was like explaining stuff, and I was like, thank God I got to see a foot while he does this because there's no way I could understand if he was just talking.
Man, so yeah, I was so fortunate to work with him, and I could give a whole hour speech on Todd and his impact on my career in such a short amount of time. Not even just like his training stuff, but just the confidence that he gave me to do what I do. But anyways, I learned a lot from him because one of my pros, John Wall, one of the first things Todd said was like same thing he was telling you is calcaneus and talus, all those things, they're not moving, blah blah. And I was like, okay, like what do you mean? And so we started to dive into it. And so now when I at my facility, when I look at it, I don't think it's as in depth as like what Todd was saying, obviously. One, because it's challenging, obviously, to get youth or high school or even college kids to like understand the importance of your foot. And then you're sitting there talking to them and they, then all of a sudden they're like, I'm not here anymore. And I think that's one of the things you have to understand on private, that side of things is you have to make things fun for the kids or they're going to lose interest very quickly. But one of the things I looked at is same thing kind of Todd was looking at is big toe, extension flexion. Do they have control of that? Simple things like just manual with my hands, and then simple things where foot's flat on the ground and like, can you lift your big toe? Can you put it down? Can you lift all your other toes? Put it down. Can you just basically like, and honestly, the kids love it because they think it's hilarious. Half the kids can't do it, so they're just laughing and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Then we'll get them out of their shoes barefoot. We'll go through some like single leg, just balance stuff. And can they create stability? Is their ankle all over the place? Is their arch just collapsing nonstop? Then we'll go through. So that would be obviously non-weight bearing. I'll kind of grab the heel and kind of move it in the frontal plane and just see if do we have glide. Look at ankle dorsiflexion, big toe. Then we'll go weight bearing, just single leg balance positions, and we'll move the free leg either forward and backwards, side to side, a little bit of rotation. And I'm just looking at, what is the foot doing? Is it stable? Is it, is the arch dropping? Is it just super wobbly, which I see a ton for kids? Then we'll go through a little bit more dynamic where we'll do like a 3D lunge or like an 8 vector lunge. And we'll just see now how does the foot interact once we're actually moving. We'll do a few reps and I'll look at the decelerative foot, so the foot that's actually moving, and then I'll look at also the plant foot. Then from there, we'll go into some like a pogo series right after that. And again, kind of like 8 vector, which is like, again, I stole straight from Todd and a lot of his work. So we'll do multiple reps of that. And like you said, I'm either looking at the foot and then I'm also looking at the knee and the hip and everything kind of up the chain from there. And I'm obviously not as detailed as Todd. I'm more just looking like, is there stability? Does the big toe, is there function in the big toe? Is it something that is limiting, or is it something that's like, I'm not going to worry too much about it right now? Because the flip side of all of this is, I would argue, in the youth and high school population, it's a very small rock. They generally need to get stronger. They're really weak humans, and they need to learn how to coordinate their body. Those are the two biggest rocks most of the time, and then everything else kind of cleans up itself. Now, like what Todd was saying, if pain becomes present, like I just had a big toe 2 months ago, then we'll start to address that a little bit more, and we'll clean it up and we'll fix it. But they're more just checklists for me personally. Is there a red flag? I call them red flags. I've had 3 or 4 athletes that have come in to go eval, and I've sent them straight to an orthopedic. 2 of them ended up getting surgery. So it's, they're called my red flags. And if they hit a red flag, I instantly go walk over to the parent. I say, hey, you need to go see so-and-so, who's my resources here. And like I said, 2 of them ended up getting surgery, and 1 ended up being out for 6 months. So, and parents appreciate that, because again, all I truly, honestly care about is the success of each athlete that comes into my facility. And I try to basically encompass everything that I did with John Wall for 2.5 years to a high school level or a youth level or a college level kid at an affordable rate. That's literally my business model.
Were those specific examples, if you can touch on them a little bit, were those specific examples like pain presenting examples that you said like, oh, we need to get help with this? Or was it like something else that you saw that was like, oh, like let's look into this a little bit deeper?
So within my evaluation, we have table work, which is basically a great way for me to just, one, talk to the athlete. I think no one talks about that enough, is that actually creating a relationship with your athletes and like them hearing your voice, how you talk. Are you sarcastic? Are you funny? Are you serious? Them being able to talk back to you and have a voice, because I tell all my athletes that I already played college sports. This process is yours. We're going to work together to create the best process for you, because you guys have probably known, it's like you have a trainer that just yells at you. You never like what they do. It's like, you're not going to get the most out of it. And so I give my athletes a lot of autonomy, even for my youth kids. Like, hey man, like, what do you want to do here today? Like, and they enjoy it a lot more. So I'll give you an example. Like, one of my girls came in, I go through a very simple, like, hip external internal rotation on the table. We go through the first process, and most of the time I just look at the athlete's face, because if they go like this, that's probably not a good sign. Put her into IR, and she almost starts crying. Go through a couple other things, put her into IR again, almost starts crying. I go walk over to her mom. She comes back. She ended up having like I can't remember exactly, but basically a labrum and a bone spur and some other kind of like genetic thing in her hip, ended up having to get a surgery. Another one, same example. We went through some like spinal stuff, flexion, extension, lateral flexion, instant red flag. This one was a while ago. I can't remember if it was flexion or extension, but she ended up having a stress fracture in her back and was out for 3 to 6 months, ended up having to rehab that. But again, that's not really my wheelhouse. So if you don't pass the table, I'm not here to like, you have to finish the workout. It's like, no, I'm going to go talk to your mom. I'm going to do it very professionally and say, hey, I would love for them to go see my PT or my doc that I have in town. And after they see them, I want to hear the report. And then after the report, then we'll move forward from there. So both those girls, I ended up doing their rehab for them. But those are just a couple examples, because then all of my stuff is table-based, kind of, then on your feet, weight bearing, and then more dynamic. And then it just kind of progresses through there.
In relation to the feet and the foot process, and again, Hunter was like talking about how we have these themes that we seem to have across shows. Is it safe to say that the athletes that play sports or participate in sports that have a more restricted ankle, so you think about the basketball players, you think about like hockey players, they typically will just have this governor of foot function because of that? Therefore, if you were to see poor foot function, it may come from those athletes? Or is that too much of a generalization and it's just like you just never know where it might come from?
Yeah. I mean, I approach every athlete that I work with as, basically an individual human every time. I think Mike G said it a while ago and it stuck with me is that, every athlete we work with is a human first. And then on top of that, as humans, like every day we wake up, we're slightly different. So these things can always kind of pop up. I don't know all the time, like, I mean, I'm sure you guys work with athletes where, I've had athletes that come in and, ankle dorsiflexion or whatever is all locked up. We work on it a little bit, it clears, and then it's not really an issue anymore. Like for whatever reason that day, what they did the day before or 2 days before, something caused that to lock up in their chain. And then we worked through it and it wasn't really an issue anymore. Typically, when those things do happen, I just make note of them and then I will reassess at least for like a couple weeks and just make sure that it's like whatever we're doing is actually sticking. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think just generally, you know, a lot of athletes have a lot of foot ankle issues because I think as of recently it's becoming a hot topic. I just think in the past it's just been more, bigger, stronger, faster. I think we're still kind of coming out of that world where it's like it's not just all about how much can you squat, how much can you, you know, bench and all these type of things. It's more of like how can you function as an athlete or human, whether that's dynamically or with load outside of just, the bigger, stronger, faster.
So, like, I think that we all would agree on this call, and that it's pretty easy to take a high school athlete, make them stronger, college athlete, make them stronger. But when you start working with these elite populations, like, and I'm not even necessarily saying with those younger individuals, the only goal is to just make them stronger, but it's easy and like low hanging fruit, so sure, do it. When you start working with some of these elite populations, like somebody like John Wall, who you weren't working with him as a rookie, like early in his career, it was a little bit later in his career. Like that whole approach probably changes to a certain extent in terms of like low hanging fruit to make him stronger. Like John in the end of his career is probably not just trying to like get stronger at basic movements. What was like, or what is your mindset when you're working with like your elite population? Some of the individuals that you have, or maybe their midpoint of their career, John, who was a little bit later in their career. Like when you think about like, okay, I'm going to sit down and like talk to this individual, figure out like what he needs, what he likes, and then write out a program. Like where does your mind go from a training perspective?
First off, when it comes, like you said, with the high school stuff, yes, I think the hardest part for people is actually just doing the simple stuff. I think people try to do all this fancy stuff that they see other people do. And that's when, I think that's the hardest part about the private sector is what we do is actually relatively simple. It's just consistency over time with a young athlete. So I want to say that first, because I think a lot of young trainers I talk to, and they're always like, well, you do all this fancy stuff or this or that with John or this. And I'm like, yeah, he's not a high school kid. And the programs that I do with high school kids, if I post them all the time, people would just be like, this is boring content. But yeah, on to John. I'm pretty free to talk about him. He's basically like my brother. I was just talking to him this morning, and he's retired now. Which congratulations to him. That's awesome. We've talked about that for a while. John was the hardest human I've ever worked with. He was, and not even he was. I learned so much from him. I also think I regressed slightly because I focused for 2.5 years on an individual human that had very unique issues and training parameters that like I went in so many different rabbit holes in different ways that like didn't translate to 95% of the population. But yeah, so I mean, I started John right after his Achilles. He was cleared. And it's just a little backstory, just 'cause I think it lays it all up, is that I started with John when he was still with the Wizards. He was just coming back. I had a week with him because of his player development coach. Within that week, he hired me full time in the first 2 days. All we did during that time was basically his like pre-court warm-up before he played pickup. And at the time, it was when they were playing pickup against the Nets, who had Kevin Durant, Kyrie, Harden at the time. And he was killing all of them. And so he was like, I've never felt this good going into a pickup game, which is just a pickup game. But he's like, I need to hire you full time. And then we just did some strength stuff at the end. And I was still obviously trying to, understand who he was as an athlete because it was very fast paced. It's kind of like what Mike was saying. Like, I didn't really get a chance to really evaluate him. It was just like, hey, come work with John for a week. So it's like, okay, I'm going to bring my, heavy hitters and we're going to go through that. Right when he gets traded then to Houston, I was actually sitting in his apartment when he got traded. He goes to Houston and doesn't bring me because it's a new team. He doesn't want to be that guy. Then fast forward that entire year, he comes back to LA, hires me full time. When he came back to LA, I've never actually said this out loud because I've been kind of cautious of how I talk about him, but now he's retired and I don't think he would mind, is he could not walk physically. And that's not a joke. We were at the court at Sports Academy. He starts to work out on the court. We shut the court down. We go to a doctor. We have some conversations around what was going on with him. And then we started our program. And mind you, I left my family. I just had my daughter, 48 hours notice with 150 clients at my facility. And I walked into what I thought was John Wall. And I walked into a very successful guy that literally could not walk without a limp, couldn't walk with anything. So answering that question is very hard because my process really came down to going back to one, he's a human. How do I get him out of pain? Now, I think one of my biggest superpowers is in this field, I have zero ego. I then instantaneously called Jesse Phillips, who works for the Clippers now, but was John's main PT in DC. I called him. I said, hey, give me, all the information that you have on John, download me. What have you done in the past? What is his, all of his history? I then called Brett, who is his PT in Miami, who basically did a lot of his work through his Achilles. So I think a lot of times we try to think, well, what am I going to do? I basically start to make phone calls and try to figure out what everybody's been doing leading up to me. Then I could then start to process, okay, this is where we need to start. This is where we need to go. So then I sit down and basically start to work through the program. And, early on, it was a lot of rehab. It was heavy. I needed to hire a good PT. I needed to hire a really good soft tissue person. And John, when I went on with John, I became his head of performance. I didn't just become his, strength and conditioning coach. So I managed all of our massage therapists, all of our PTs, all of our, IVs, anything that came under the performance umbrella, I managed and coordinated. And then every night would have meetings with all of those people to figure out, hey, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? What did you feel? What is lacking? What is missing? How can I help you? They would give me feedback. I would go into the session the next day. I would then give them feedback before they came in that night to work with them. So it wasn't just me, obviously. And I think that's the thing I try to talk about the most is it took an entire team. And the team that we had in place was an amazing team. And we were able to fix him in a sense. I also like to add that within that period, we had 2 doctors that we went to that looked at him and told him he should retire. This was before his 2-year, $13 million deal with the Clippers. So I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that's where I started. And you could repeat your question if I didn't hit it at all.
It's awesome to hear all the things that lead up to thinking about the program, because if you would have told me we did this, this, and this without the front end story of all of that, then I don't think it carries as much weight. So that was awesome.
Yeah, but maybe we can work through this a little bit. So you talked about how when you first started working with him when he was still in Washington, it was that super quick onboarding process before he's like, hey, let's just do this. So when you were doing that, so quote unquote, bringing the heavy hitters into those first couple of days, what does that mean exactly? What was that process of getting him to buy into you super, super quickly where you got to the point where he's like, hey, let's do this full time before obviously he went to Houston?
So I knew he was playing pickup. And I think a lot of times people, when they either start with a guy or are with a guy, I think sometimes, especially in the elite, especially in the private sector elite, where you're, this human is paying you to take care of them. It's not like I'm part of the team. So, I think sometimes we go a little too easy on these guys and forget that they're high level athletes. So when I'm looking at a warm up for a pickup game or a court workout, my whole thing is I need to get them extremely activated, extremely in tune with what's going on, and basically like lathered in a sweat, like almost a workout. So, for example, that would be, we're fortunate with John, he's got table work. So that's his soft tissue, that's, his rolling, that's most of his mobility stuff. So we get off the table, and we're going to get right to things. We're going to go straight into some like isometric stuff. So we're going to go some like knee, hip, ankle, global hip and lower leg ISO stuff. And then we're going to get into basically kind of what I had before I actually met Todd. I kind of went down this whole 3D, I forget actually even what it's called, but that Gary Gray AFS style fit stuff. And that's typically my warm up for most of my basketball guys. So like, for example, would be kind of the anterior step where you're getting some extension into a posterior step with like a med ball slam. And then you're coming back with that. We'll change front foot positions. We have internal IR, internal, external bias of the foot. We'll change where we're reaching the ball. So we're getting a bunch of spine action. We'll take that into the same kind of concept where we're going frontal plane with it. And then we'll turn it into like, transverse plane where we're throwing a ball and, whatever. But very quick hitters and very, efficient. And then we'll go, I'll take that back a step. We'll grab a Viper and we'll basically go through that same series. 3D lunge, heavy, medium, light, and then we'll go into that dynamic action. I think part of it was John had never done any of that stuff. I think typically guys, I'm sure you guys see it, you're Arizona State basketball, guys come to the gym, do a couple quad stretches, couple toe touches, put their shoes on, go jump on the court. Their knees hurt like hell for like 15 minutes. And then they're like, oh, I'm warmed up. And then it's like, okay, cool. Where basically like, then it was like John would start the pickup and he was flying. And he's like, I've never felt like this before a game. And then, after, like I said, it was the basic strength because I was like, I do not want to hurt this guy because this is my first day meeting him. And it was relatively low volume, high intensity, and just enough to touch what we needed to touch and call it a day. And then we'd go through some, cool down stuff, and that was about it. And I just brought different variations of that. I'd get a landmine out there, kind of go through a similar thing, just different implements, center mass bells, all that kind of stuff. But just taking him through a variety of movements within three-dimensional planes. And he's just never done any of that stuff. And I think that was one huge piece to our success after he hired me, was getting him to move more transverse, more frontal plane, because he was such a dynamic downhill, get out of my way, I'm going to dunk on you, or I'm just going to come at 100 miles per hour at you. On top of that, then was deceleration. So those were like his things he sucked at. And we spent a lot of time developing those things. And then he ended up, doing what he was supposed to do.
I don't want to get too far away from the training aspect of this whole thing because I think that there's a lot that we can dig into, but I am interested in like the logistical nature of this experience you had over those almost 3 years. Like you had a facility, John hires you, he went to Houston, you weren't with him for that year, he comes back, you're with him. Like what were the logistics of that? One, in running your facility, and then also like managing your life. Were you out in Houston, like when he was in LA, then you were closer and you were with him full time? Like what were the logistics of that?
Absolute hell. The first year was nice because he was in LA. I went to DC for like 2 weeks. He gets traded to Houston. You're not going to Houston. Cool. Back home. No problem. Awesome. Ran my facility. Comes back to LA. Same thing after the first day. Hey, I need to hire you full time because I need you to fix me, basically, because he couldn't walk and he needed somebody that was going to do what I did. And he gave me 48 hours. That's why I always say that. He's like, you're going to leave. So I was like, okay, like, what does that mean? He's like, well, send my financial team what you need. If we agree on it, then we're good. So I sit down with my wife, go through some stuff, send to the team. Financial advisor says, if John wants to do this, then John's going to do it because technically it's his money. John approved it. I fortunately had a trainer that was renting my facility, renting space for my facility. I basically said, hey, you want a free facility? And he's like, yep. And I left 120 clients took zero ownership of my facility because mind you, at this time, I thought I was going to be with John for 5 years, 6 years. So I was like, I don't know I don't even know if I'll go back to my facility ever again. So it was kind of like, hey, if the facility goes to zero, it's cool. Like, whatever, I'll just shut it down. If it still stays afloat, great. Uh, and then, yeah, people don't, I mean, obviously people don't know because I don't always share it out there, but like, I had just had my daughter, and before that, me and my wife had two miscarriages. And so, like, it was a huge burden because I just had my daughter. We moved to Houston. I don't know if people remember, John doesn't play in Houston that year. So all we do is train. We fly with the team, we travel with the team, and we just train. Then we moved to Miami. So there's about a year and a half time where I saw my family. Let's call it 400 days, where I saw my family 44 days after having my daughter. And she was 6 months when I left. So then we get him to get signed with the Clippers, and it was the best day of my life. I threw a massive party at my house, and we were back home, and I was able to be with my family. I was able to be with him, and we thought we were going to be there for 3 years, and then obviously he ended up getting let go. But yeah, it was an absolute nightmare in hell.
Well, shout out to your wife. Holy moly, dude.
She's
She's
MVP. I try to put it up more, but she gets really pissed at me when I try to call her out like every day on my Instagram because she's like, "You need to stop doing that." And I'm like, "All
I
right."
I had my daughter in October of the year that I worked for the Kings, and we started training camp and I started traveling. And I was gone, I don't know, it was a 9-month season. We lost to the Warriors in the first round, so like whatever that was, May-ish. And that felt like a lot. Like we had like 2 11-day road trips. 40 something days out of 400 is like incomprehensible.
Yeah, it was yeah. I mean, my wife is like, there's not words to express who she is as a human, but she. So when I left Proactive, my goal was within 5 years to get an NBA athlete as me. Because I think when you work in private facilities, it's cool to say, I've trained so and so. That's why you never hear about me talk about who I've trained, because I've trained a ton of NBA players and NFL players because that's Proactive's thing. So my goal was basically like, I want to be back with an NBA guy. And that took 2 years after I left Proactive. And so my wife kind of knew like that was what I wanted to do. But again, I could talk about this forever. Like, part of the story was that when we went to Houston, I had a real estate agent I met with to buy a house. We were going to move to Houston. The same day that happened, that's when John went and met with the head coach, and they said, "Hey, we're not going to play you this year. We're going to trade you." Well, as you know, in the NBA, a trade could happen any freaking day. So my wife's like, "Well, I'm not moving to Houston," and then he gets traded, and we leave, and you have to leave, and I have to leave again, and I don't know. So it ended up being like, okay, well, like, why don't you just stay at home and let's just pray he gets traded soon, and then we'll just move to that city. So it's endless, and that's why I always say it was absolute hell, but we made through it, and I grew a lot, and it's good to be home.
I mean, yeah, it's an incredible experience to have. Like, regardless
Yeah,
of the time that you spend, like those are experiences that like don't come every day. So it's probably something that you seriously consider of like, this is an experience I could never have again. And I'm sure over
yeah,
those 2 years you got to see and work with and be around like some incredible experiences. So it's interesting for sure.
So going back to some of the training stuff, right? Like you talk about, you get to work with John again. You come back, you're in LA. You walk into the gym. It's like, dude, this is a guy who is this very dynamic basketball player and relies on that speed and that explosiveness and his ability to go downhill. And he clearly doesn't have that ability right now, right? Like he doesn't even have a tenth of that ability right now. So it's like clearly like the plan changes pretty quickly in your mind. Obviously, you have to now build all this context of like what's been going on, who he's been working with, his treatment that he's been going through. But what is how does that plan evolve, and what then does become your plan of action from like a training standpoint to try to get him back into that area? And I'm sure it's not like a 1 week, 2 week, 3 week is a long process, but how does your mind change from, oh, this is the player that he was, this is the player that we're trying to get back to, and this is where he is right now, and he's not that person?
yeah. So So I went through that whole process talking to everybody. Basically found out that his left knee is beat up. Obviously, as you guys would probably know, with 9-year career, with how dynamic he was, with a few surgeries and things like that. Obviously, had the Achilles on his left side, which he ended up having 3 surgeries on because he had an infection and all kinds of stuff. He had people always trip out. He had a 2-inch bone spur in his Achilles. That's why he ended up actually having that. And it is a legit 2 inches. Is every doctor that we've ever been to almost like their jaw hits the ground when they see a picture of it. And mind you, he played on that for 32 games, averaging 21 and 10 or 11 in DC. So then with that then we go to Houston, and I always tell people it was kind of a blessing that he actually ended up not playing in Houston because he was not ready. So we go to Houston, and we basically he's got this knee issue that we got to work through. So we basically start heavy isos within ranges of motion that don't cause pain, and we very annoying, as you guys know, like long duration yielding isos in varying positions, from a leg press to a knee extension to split squats. Then we start to work through kind of the same concept through the calf, bent knee, straight leg extension, Kaiser machines, same kind of concept through the hamstring. It was basically super heavy iso focused, because what I learned very quickly and what traditionally you think about is, okay, heavy, slow tempos, long duration, strength training to get him stronger, because he had a huge deficit on his left leg when it came to strength, asymmetry left to right, which we found out quickly in Houston. Here's the problem. Every time we would go through heavy strength training, his knee would blow up and his knee would be in pain and he would feel worse. Okay, so now you have to throw all of that stuff out of the window, because my job is to get you back on the court feeling great, no matter how that looks. So again, we go back to just heavy isos and yielding isos, then adding load to those isos. And through, 4 to 6 weeks of that, the knee starts to feel better. He's able to start to get lower within the isometric positions. And then on top of that, we were trying to basically bring his body weight way down, because obviously I forget the exact numbers, but it's like every pound you lose takes off however much poundage on your knee. And he was a little bit overweight. And I thought, okay, if we could get you down to 200, 205, I think that might be a little bit lighter than what you're typically used to, but I think it'll make your knee feel way better and you'll be able to move a lot better. So then basically we go from all those isometrics to a little bit more traditional training. We're able to start to get into some like heavy slow resistance stuff. So like 3-3-3 tempos, 4-4-4 tempos, 5-5-5 tempos. We worked that for a long duration of time. And with him, again, it was like, I want to say we basically did leg press, split squats, RDLs, some hip extension, and a bunch of lower leg stuff. And I want to say those were probably the only exercises that we did, because we found they don't hurt. He's able to load his system and he's able to get that stimulus and that adaptation. And we were having huge success with it. So again, I wasn't trying to implement anything that I thought was like, let's go. Like, for example, we tried to do a rear foot elevated one time. Next morning, no bueno. Cool. We're going back to split squat. We'll just change the way that we load it, whether it's a goblet hold, whether it's, unilateral, bilateral, whether it's a bar, like whatever it was. And then once we started that phase, we went heavy, extensive plyos and skipping and the kind of the same locomotion stuff that I do with my kids, because as you guys know, with the Achilles, his left to right single leg pogo, relatively dynamic right leg, non-existent left leg, 0. If you had a small DC block and you had to just hop like this, the right leg was like this and the left leg was like this. And he was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, can you go any faster? No. Okay. We're going to start with band assisted, quick, just starting to build that back. Just get used to that. Skipping. an amazing drill that I don't think enough people do, but just starting to skip. Let me close my eyes and hear your feet interact with the ground. And you could hear it. If you listen to someone skip while you close your eyes, especially on a basketball court with shoes, I could hear a distinct difference between his right leg coming down versus left leg coming down. And just start to build over time those in an extensive manner. Then we finally, again, this is months process. Then we finally get to more dynamic stuff. We start to get to like what I talked about before, a lot of our 3D movement. We started to get to some jumping and output stuff. This is then maybe a little bit before that, we introduced Hawkin plates. I reached out to Drake. Drake helped me a ton. Again, I don't have an ego in this. I called Drake, hey, can I get some plates? Well, you also helped me on the sports science side because I had not used plates before that. And I knew, well, just getting plates and jumping isn't going to help me. I need to understand what I'm actually looking at. And I don't have all the time in the world to like dive deep into it. So Drake, can you just kind of be my sports scientist? And Drake helped me a ton. So then we started to get the plates. So then what I did is basically we would jump every single day. If he was green, we trained extremely hard. If he was yellow, we had a B day. If he was red, we're going straight recovery. I'm calling our massage therapists, our PTs, saunas, cold, all that stuff. So then we basically just started training when he was primed and ready to go, which came out to 2-ish days a week where like we were really getting after it. The other days were heavy ISOs and that kind of day. And like I said, the C day was, pure recovery, which for him and his age and his history, I think is a huge reason why we were able to get him back, because we basically only trained when he felt great. We took care of all the little things outside of that. And then on top of that, what people don't really realize is then we went into return to play. And I was in charge of all of that. So getting a guy to go on the court and pulling a guy like John Wall off the court after 20 minutes, good luck. People don't understand how hard that actually is. Then they're going to play pickup and, hey, I got you on a 30-minute clock, but you just lost the game. No, you're done. Well, what do you mean I'm done? I just lost. I got to play one more. No, you don't. You're done. Get off. And so then we went through that process. And then everyone started to see him, viral, playing Miami runs. Oh my gosh, John Wall's back. And then that's when the Clippers started to happen. And we kind of got him back. I know I just talked for a ton of time. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's kind of the process we went through.
For taking from not being able to walk to playing in runs and being close to his old self, it was a very good summary. I have a lot of thoughts. One, shout out to Drake and Hawkin because I've seen your new plates with the red tape and the logo on them. They're sick. We have some custom ASU ones that are awesome, but yours with the red tape, like all red, it looks incredible.
First all red ones.
Yeah, they're dope. The other thing is that we were having a conversation with Daniel Shapiro a few episodes ago, and he was talking about how like with most of his population, this is the same experience I have. Not necessarily at the college level. Some of my older guys, yes, but especially at the professional level, is like you really just need to find like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 exercises that they feel comfortable with, that they like, that they can load. And it's funny because I think about like my own training, and it's like I never do certain exercises. I haven't done certain exercises in 6 years because I train myself and I don't like them. They don't feel good. And I do the ones that I like every day. So it's like, if I'm doing that with myself because it feels good and I enjoy these exercises and I feel like I can load them, why would I not take that same? And it's obviously easier when you're with one individual where you can just like kind of get down to like what feels good, what don't you like, see how you respond. It's a little bit tougher with a team of 15, but I think that there's so much power in that of like, listen, we just want to load your lower body in some type of squat pattern, whether it's safety bar, whether it's pitch shark, whether it's trap bar, like who cares? But I think that's really powerful and easier to do with one individual because you're with them and you can do that so easily. But I think there's so much power to that. And I think a lot of people get lost in the like, well, we've got to progress from the Zercher squat to the front squat to the back squat. And it's like, all right, you don't need to. That's Stone Age.
Yeah. Not to cut you off, but I think that's why even with my youth kids, I told you I give autonomy. Because what I do, let's just say, for example, it's single leg, and say you start with let's say you just start with a split squat, then you would go to a reverse lunge, and then you go to a rear foot elevated split squat, right? Simple progression. That's a lot of people do. Well, one of the things that I'll do basically, and like we were talking about earlier, is slightly evaluation. If I go from a split squat and I go to a reverse lunge, no problem. But then I take you to a rear foot elevated, and you're like, ow, that hurts. That doesn't feel good. I don't like it. cool. We're going back here. But then, like with John, for example, within that last phase, he was rear foot elevating like the 70s to 80s, I think, for like 5 on each leg. So it's progression and evaluation. 6 months ago, you couldn't do rear foot elevated. 6 months later, you're doing rear foot elevated. We have slowly started to do our job because a movement pattern that felt terrible for you now feels amazing. And so that's what I always tell athletes. It's not right or wrong. If I put you in a front squat and you're like, ow, this freaking sucks. I don't want to do this. This hurts my back. I don't like this setup, blah, blah, blah. Cool. I now note that like, hey, let's try that again in 4 weeks. Why? Because it gives athletes a ton of confidence. All my kids that they did an exercise they didn't like, didn't feel good. We then 4 or 6 weeks later get to it, and now they're loading it, and now they look amazing doing it. You see the smile on their face, you see the confidence grow. And that was a big thing with John, was like, obviously it was range of motion within the left knee. Could he get it to like bend and move, flex and extend without creating a ton of pain? And so we would use movement as like our eval on top of obviously the plates and stuff. But that's just like an easy way that I think about it sometimes is you couldn't rear foot 6 months ago. And like even John, who is John Wall, when he started to rear foot elevated, he was like, I'm back. Like, I feel good. I'm ready to go. And that was when I was like, all right, we're good, man. Let's just keep doing it.
Rear foot elevated is one of those exercises that I choose to do myself. One of the only ways that I load my lower body right now. So
I'll tell you, day one with John, I was like, I cannot wait for this guy to rear foot elevate split squat. First day, next morning he woke up, his knee was like this big and he couldn't even walk. I was like,
yeah,
oh shit.
Athletes hate it, but I'm like, why do you guys hate this? This feels so good when I do it, but they're like, this sucks. I don't think it sucks because it like hurts or uncomfortable. It's just like it's a more difficult exercise.
Yeah, it's hard.
If we're ranking RPE of lower body exercises, but
so for that whole process, what was like the daily conversation between you and him? And was it like hey, like my body's in a bad place. This is just 100% you, 0% me, just help me out? Or was it like, hey, this is like true, like a 50-50, like let's sit down and talk about what we're doing, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and the constant reinforcement of obviously how he's feeling as well?
John was the hardest person I've ever worked with. I said that. He's very unique. He never really trained his whole career. I tell guys this all the time. The young athletes that I work with are pros that I talk to. The earlier you could start to train, whether it's basic, whether anything, the better. Because after you get hurt, that's not a great time to start acting like this is important. So that was difficult to get him to be in the weight room every single day. But like I said, he's like my brother, man. We are like, if I released some of the footage, we would be at each other's necks half the time, trying to convince him to do certain things. But the part that I always appreciated about him was that he knew how much I truly deeply cared about his success. I knew what our goal was. We would sit down. His goal was to get back in the NBA. His goal was, I don't want to go out like this. And that is what drove us. It was an everyday thing. It was a battle a lot of the days. There was days where we did not talk to each other. There was days where I would sign language train him. I would demo an exercise, 5 reps. He would do it. 0 words spoken, hour training session. Mind you, I lived inside of his house. So there's so much I could dive into his 2.5 years, but the process was, we built such a bond that he trusted everything I said. He knew that I had his best interests at mind. He saw that every night I would be on the phone with our massage therapist, that I'd be on the phone with the PT. I would be altering things every single night based on what they were seeing. I would be the one where we go to doctor's appointments and the doctor would be talking to John and John would be like, no, you need to talk to him. I would then communicate with the doctor after I would put it in John's terms. So we just had this kind of relationship that was like, okay, all I have to worry about is doing what you tell me to do. Now, that's not always easy. It sounds easier than it is, but he knew that, and we were able to accomplish kind of what we did. So it wasn't like an everyday, like, sit down, hey, let's do this. It was just more like, he knows that I'm here to do this job. He knows that I'm going to do it at the highest possible level. And he knows that everything that I do is for him to succeed, nothing else.
Would you do it again? And I know that you're working with Rui, and I don't know if it's the exact same situation in terms of the time commitment, but like, would you do what you did with John again for the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
It's a really hard question. I would I would say no. And the only reason I would say no, well, the only way I would say yes, it wouldn't have to be technically the money, which I hate talking about money. It would have to be that my family and my kids can go with me and they were able to just stay where I am comfortably. Not like, hey, this is because I don't have to get into that, but like I have a house here in town, so it's like I still have payments, so it's like I don't need another mortgage and another, so it's like that would be the deciding factor. The other hard part that people don't think about is it's ever changing. So like, yeah, you could say we're going here for 3 years, but then you get traded 6 months into it, or you get traded a year into it. So it's like, okay, now we're moving there. And I think I talked to one of my mentors about it. It's kind of a weird dynamic when you talk about this world because, and again, this is a little bit more like how I think and process is a pro athlete of that caliber. When they say I retire, they never have to work a day in their life again. When John says I retire, I got to go back to work tomorrow. Like I don't have enough money to never work again in my life. So that's where it gets challenging. Is that when you do something like I did, 2.5 years of my life I spent hyper focused on an individual human. And once we basically kind of parted ways and then he retires, like I got to go get another job, which, if it's not hard to go get another job because that's what it is, but it's just a whole another different dynamic you have to think about. And that's one of the reasons I would say no. But if it was a perfect situation, yeah, because there's something special about working with one individual, being on the same exact page, and really being able to dive in on like, how can I impact you in every possible way from mental, emotional, physical, daily life, like all that kind of stuff.
We had a conversation with Danny Foley and Chris Guerin in San Diego. It was our like one time talking about in-person podcast before we started. It was like the one time we were actually able to sit down in a studio with our guests and have a conversation. But anyways, they were talking about the work that they did with Les Spellman and Mike, remind me her name. She's like the best female soccer player in the world, so I'm embarrassed that I Kat
McCarty, yeah.
Yeah, McCarty. And it got me and Mike having a conversation of like true high performance. And you think about like your situation where you are one person to one person along with coordinating other individuals that are high level practitioners. And then you think about like their situation, and it was Danny and Chris and it was Les with this one individual. And then you like zoom out to most like team sports situations and like people want to talk about high performance, and I don't care how many people you have. Like when there's that to me is like you're starting to sniff high performance. Zoom all the way out to the team setting, like what I'm in, I'll never claim to do high performance because it's me and 15 guys and I have one athletic trainer and a nutritionist. Like you can have relatively high performance, but if we're talking like true high performance, there's so much to understand and know about one individual athlete, let alone 15 guys, that like I truly believe the only way you can like achieve absolute high performance is with a model where it's a team, an ecosystem around one individual, because as you know probably far too well, there's so much that goes into it, and especially with a professional basketball player and the lives that most of them typically live.
And that's why I say is that I don't have an ego. I think there's some people that try to act like they could wear all of these hats. And that was the first thing I talked to John about when he hired me, was that I'm going to go get the best PT, the best soft tissue person at minimum to start. And he was like, whatever you think I need to do, we're going to do. And it's like I had Danny and Chris out at my facility 4 or 5 months ago to do some work with some of my athletes. It was amazing. But that situation would be like, what I did, and I think one of my biggest values as a connector from some of these relationships I have now is, if I were to have someone like a sock, whatever, like I would call people like Danny, Chris, and Les and be like, hey, can you guys handle this pocket for me? Obviously, whatever the money made sense. Yes, I'm going to handle this pocket. And now you start to go and you start to work, because when you have a team like that, it's just, it makes your life a lot easier. And like you said, it becomes true high performance, not just me trying to do everything possible to do whatever I have to do. It's like, no, I need help.
In those situations, you really begin to, and I'm a guy that I don't really care what my title is, but as of recent, I've realized that like the title director of performance and the title like head strength and conditioning coach are, even if most people, some people do the same things with either title. Like to me, those are very different titles. If you're a director of performance versus a head strength and conditioning coach, like very, very different. But one thing that I want to touch on, and we'll just end on a little bit lighter note, not necessarily talking about as much training in depth stuff, but you recently had a couple week trip to Japan, and you got to meet up and hang out with our guy Daniel Day for a little bit too. So, is that your first time to Japan? First time being over there?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
was it? How was the overall experience?
Absolutely amazing.
Really?
I want to move there.
Why
Yeah.
so?
I mean, I was obviously spoiled to a level that I couldn't even imagine. I was obviously with my pro Rui, who is Japan. I think he's like the only active Japanese NBA player. I think he's maybe the only drafted ever Japanese basketball player.
There's that one dude on the Bulls. He wasn't, or Grizzlies now. I think he's on a
Yuki.
two way.
Oh,
Yeah, he's
Yuki.
about 5'4", but he's
So
fucking
he
a
was
hooper.
I was fortunate to meet him, but like I don't know how to explain it. He's the only one that's actually like done anything in the
yeah.
NBA. So it was unreal. I mean, his camp was crazy. He sold out 15,000 person arena that they just built for him. I mean, like he and Phil Handy was the trainer. But just the total experience, and like I always tell people, like I'm so grateful to be in a position to where I have a guy like that takes me on a trip like that. Like he doesn't have to do that, and like I think that's something that like he doesn't have to do that, and to be able to do something like that was absolutely amazing. It just happened to be that like me and Daniel Day, like you said, have connected a few times on Instagram back and forth, and then he posted like Tokyo, and I was like, dude, I'm about to be there in 2 weeks. How long are you there for? He's like, my wife just signed a volleyball here for 9 months. And I was like, dude, that's sick. You want to meet up? We basically ended up meeting up every day I was in Tokyo because I didn't really have much to do outside of what we were doing. And then he was just like chilling, uh, which is amazing. I mean, it just shows the power of social media in a positive way that like we were able to meet. I think sometimes we think people on social media and stuff are like, I don't know. It just like we had amazing conversations. We sat like had coffee, talked about training, talked about life, trained together, and you just bounce ideas back and forth. And we both learned a ton from each other. And it was just, like I said, it was an absolutely amazing trip. And then I met one of the coaches from a pro team out there, Ryan. I forget his last name now. He was a DC player development coach, so he knew John and he knew the work I did with John. He then now has hired Adam Pentway to be his head strength or director of performance there. So it's like all this, like it just happened to be all this like weird things happening at the same time. But what Rui's trying to do in Japan is really amazing, and hopefully gets out there more. He's really trying to bring kind of a basketball culture and how to help these kids get what they need because it's not as big there obviously as it is over here.
If you look at like the the national Japanese basketball team, it's like four Japanese dudes. Obviously, Roy's on it, and then like one white dude. And because they're just allowed to like bring in one international person if they want to as a Japan national team, so it's like this 1 7 foot white dude who played college at like Gonzaga or something, just with four Japanese basketball players. That's so cool, dude. Were you just in Tokyo, or were you kind of moving around a little bit?
We went Tokyo, we went Kyoto. His camp was in Nagoya, and then we went back to Tokyo. So we were all over the place. Like I said, it was. I don't always like to post about it or even like talk about it that much because it's like I had nothing to do with it. I was literally just happened to be a person that was along for the ride, which is like absolutely amazing. Um, but I'm just super grateful for him. I've been with him for 7 years. We have a great relationship, and it's just it's super fun. And I know on the question sheet It was like, and I was talking to Daniel Day about it. The one thing that is funny about traveling like that is people think like talk about high performance. People think high performance is like you're in a P3 or you're in a proactive. That couldn't be farther than the truth. We were in a techno gym, hotel gym that had 4 pieces of equipment. The heaviest dumbbells were 22 kilograms and a bench. And it's like, I posted it and like, I posted like, what would you do here to get your athletes, a stimulus adaptation or whatever you're going for? And like 3 of these like younger trainers that like follow me, they're like, I would just quit. I was like, I mean, that's probably a lot of people. I mean, if you like that's the truth. That's what we trained in for 2 weeks. And that's just the reality of that. That's what you get. And if you can't do your job, good luck.
It's like post game in away NBA arenas. They give you power blocks, a Bosu ball, and like 3 bands, and it's like, okay, train your team where they don't want to train. You have 15 guys coming at random times, and the bus leaves in 30 minutes, and they still have to shower. It's like, oh shit.
That's high performance.
All right, so Jared, we'll wrap up here. We won't take up too much of your time here, but we will finish the last question that we ask everybody, and it's a question that's powered by 1080 Motion, and it is, what is something that you do or think that a majority of the field would disagree with?
Good question. I saw this on a thing and I was like, what am I going to say? I think of something cool to say. I don't really think I have anything cool to say. I think it comes back to like one of the things me and Daniel were talking about. I think sometimes what we do, or just strength conditioning in general, is a lot more about the connection with the human and athlete in front of you than it is technically about the programming that you write. The programming that you write is very important. Don't get me wrong. I hate to say that sometimes because then people are like, oh, I can just do whatever I want. It's like, no, that's really important. But if you don't have a relationship, a connection, a trust with the athlete or athletes that you're working with, good luck getting them to do your perfect program. And I think sometimes in this field, people focus so heavy on the science, the programming, the what exercises to pick and all this, that they forget about the connection side. So that's one thing that I've always kind of been huge on. The example I always give people is like a couple of my classmates that were top of the class, like always, and like A's on every test, like their business, they work in like economics now because like they couldn't train a human. Like there's a level of like, you have to be able to have that connection. And like, I think people don't talk about that enough. It's more talking about, well, training and this and that and force play data. It's like all of that is very important. But if you cannot connect with the human and truly care about them and show that and be able to show them that authentically, I don't care. You're not going to be like, you're not going to make it.
I think about that with when I get interns all the time is like, I would rather have an intern that literally knows like nothing about performance, but can like relate to individuals and kind of like direct them and get them to buy in and they feel comfortable around them than like this brainiac that like knows more than I do about periodization, but like is awkward around guys and makes them feel uncomfortable. And it's like, I think about that all the time. And then I think to myself, it's like, art, it's really easy to like educate people with like things within this field. Not saying that you can obviously educate them on everything, but like get them up to speed to a certain amount. But it's like, it's really hard to develop those soft skills. From what I've seen, it's like, granted, I haven't had people for like long term under me, but it's like, unfortunately, it almost seems like people just got it, they don't. And it's like, you've got to develop like this comfort level in your own skin and just like presence that is hard to do if it doesn't come innately to you. So I
just had a young trainer that lasted 1 week in my facility. And I love the kid. I trained him for so long. He's one of my favorite people in the world. That's what it was. And it's also hard. I will give, grace to some people when I'm sure like when an intern comes into Arizona State, they probably feel very timid of you, the way you operate your facility, the way you manage. It's like, I can't do that. And it's trying to pull that out of them. But like you said, some kids have it. Some people have it and some people don't. But I think more people need to try to like train that, like go put yourself in awkward situations where you're forced to talk. Like that's just my thought that I don't think people would disagree with it, but I don't think enough people talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Awesome, Jared. Well, give us your social media handles. Where can people find you, reach out, see what you do?
Just JW Performance. I'm basically only on Instagram. I have a Twitter, but I don't really use it. It's just
Cool,
JW Performance. Yeah.
cool, awesome. Well,
Perfect.
thank you for your time. I'm glad we were able to make this happen. I'm glad you got home from Japan safely, and keep killing it out there. And eventually, I just flew out to San Diego a couple weeks ago to see Mike and do some stuff for Move the Needle. But next time I go out, hopefully we can make a trip up to LA because there's a lot of
Yeah, we'll
people
do
that
it.
around that area that we need to tap in with. So we'll be
Yeah, it'd be great.
eventually.
That'd be awesome. No, I
But
appreciate you guys having me on. It's an honor. Appreciate
yeah,
it.
for sure, man.
Awesome.